Hi, I'm Lisa Zielinski. I'm a Senior Vice President at Ipsos Creative Excellence. We're here today to talk about our research with See Her. It's called Strive for More. And we're really excited to unpack the learnings that we've had this past year and talk about some personal takes from our experts here with me today. Do you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
I'd love to. My name is Yatisha Ford, and I lead Insights and Thought Leadership for See Her. If you're not familiar with See Her, we are a division of the ANA focused on inclusive marketing, specifically on the accurate representation and portrayal of women and girls in advertising to help marketers to drive business growth.
And I'm Rachel Herzig. I'm a vice president with the Creative Excellence Division at Ipsos. And I'm very passionate about this topic and have been for many years, and get to work hand in hand with clients and brands to actually bring those insights into action for advertising.
Hi, my name is Shelly Ye. I'm a senior director at Ipsos Creative Excellence. I work on the data behind this research. I look at our advertising effectiveness database and GEM.
Yatisha, tell us a little bit more about GEM and how we think about that as a measure.
Yes. So See Her started in 2016 with the mission of accurately portraying women and girls because there was a disconnect in terms of what women were seeing in advertisements versus their actual reality and lived experiences. And quickly, this became a business strategy, not just a social good strategy. Although it's both, it has positive return on society, at the same time, positive ROI. And GEM was developed to help to keep the industry accountable to the progress of advancing and more accurately portraying women and girls in media advertising. And the methodology is very simple and straightforward, and it was intended to be open source so that everyone could lean in and participate and utilize the measure to measure how accurate these human portrayals are.
All right, so we're here today to talk about Strive for More and all of this great work that you guys have done together. Let's start with what I think is the most provocative data point in the entire piece. We did some primary research where we asked women and men how they see themselves in advertising. And what we found is that 15% of US women feel like they are seen in ads compared to 40% of men. That is shocking to me. Rachel, talk about your reaction to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of me was shocked to see it quantified and come in so low, but the other part of me really wasn't, because I also sit in that camp of the 15% as well, especially as the hats I wear in life continue to evolve as a woman. And it's also very reflective of what we hear in a lot of our research and what we really know to be true, that you can't come back from a bad brief. So when you don't have a foundation with a relevant insight, of course, women are going to feel like they're seen and heard and understood in the advertising. We talk a lot about in the paper how relevance is a top driver of that advertising effectiveness, and that comes from that initial strategy and consumer insight point. And we know that this matters all the way through to kind of the end funnel, that high identity alignment actually drives a 10% increase in brand interest and a 17% increase in brand purchase. So I wasn't very shocked to see it, but it is kind of an astonishing statistic.
I would say I too was not completely surprised, but I was a bit disappointed. What we're seeing is that just consumers want more. There's rising expectations. Like you mentioned, there's more hats that you wear. There's more dimensions and intersections to people that they want to see reflected, whether it's across gender, their age, their race, ethnicity, even different accents are what people want to see reflected. So the more authentic and the more modern the portrayals and the more nuanced that they can be, along with a mix of aspiration and reality, this is what consumers are going to be leaning more into. Again, back to your point about cultural relevancy. But unfortunately, advertising is backsliding and consumers are taking note of it. And one of the biggest barriers that we saw was over-sexualization, surprisingly enough. It's not just about, not showing women as they are, but also retrenching to these stereotypes and it's just unfortunately way too common. And we saw with the report that we just did that there were 6 of the 9 industries that we looked at were actually either stagnant or backsliding in terms of accurate portrayal of women and girls in advertising.
Yeah, I feel like just being a woman watching and consuming ads this summer, like you sort of feel that backslide happening and you see it. And I think we all lived through that, but some sort of questionable portrayals of women in media and ads this year. So, as people are sort of heading into their 2026 planning, I think it's really important that we're talking about what women actually want to see in advertising. So I'm really excited to kind of unpack that with you guys today. And Shelley, you worked on this analysis when we originally did it several years ago and have been along the journey along the way. So talk to us a little bit about how the drivers of GEM have changed, and how we're doing on some of those individual pillars versus our previous analysis.
All right, so brands have nailed the basic. The appropriate pillar has steadily increased through the past 5 years, and respect has steadily, consistently remained above 50%. We're not seeing the egregious stereotypes of the past, but however, the 2 pillars that drive the strongest business impact, positive presentation and role model, have flatlined. And these were the areas our original research identified as highest impact. The problem is that brands are focusing on avoiding offense rather than creating this connection and these authentic representation. So they basically raised the floor, but haven't lifted the ceiling.
We went out to women. We talked to them about, what it really looks like to be show a role model, show them what they want to be seeing in advertising. And one of the things that we saw is that they want to see women being portrayed as leaving toxic situations or relationships. That ranked the highest as a way of showing empowerment for women. That was really surprising to me. Talk to me about your reaction to that and, what that really says about the challenges that women are going through today.
Well, one of the things that I will have to say about the partnership with Ipsos is that you all are always going the extra mile to help us to unearth and uncover the why behind the insights that we're seeing, and going the extra step of asking women, what do you mean when we say to you, what does agency look like? What does positive representation look like? And helping us to refine these definitions has been super helpful. And this was one of them that, again, was a surprise coming out of, and I love surprises, coming out of the research that ranked so high, was seeing women saying that they wanted to see women prioritizing more empowering relationships, if we were just to turn that negative to a positive, and what that could look like. Because essentially what we define as a positive life change would encompass something like that. And we did not know exactly what that looked like until you all went and did that research. So thank you very much. What we're finding again is that this definition of making a positive life change, seeking out and prioritizing empowering relationships, is certainly something that brands can storytell, but also something that brands can do and actually be and have a role within an advertisement to a female consumer that actually would resonate with women. We know that 80% of the top GEM scoring ads actually feature women who are making positive life changes. So what we would say to brands like a retail brand or any other sort of category that is lacking in this area, that are under leveraging this particular driver, is to think about ways that you can show and help women to reclaim their agency. Show them making a fresh start and make your brand a part of that. I know that that can be difficult. It's easier maybe for a health food brand or, for some that are more endemic to something like that, to show women making a positive life change going from here to there. But you can definitely do it with showing them actually fulfilling a transformation, showing them in a way that's not limited to just a stereotype.
Yeah, I think the connection of the brand to that moment is something that we see is really critical. Rachel, you talked about that earlier, that a lot of the success and the effectiveness really comes back to the brief and making sure that you really understand the brand's role in empowering women in that way is really what kind of makes that connection work. Rachel, I wanted to follow up and really bring forward some of the consumer voice that we heard in the research. Yatisha, you mentioned we went out and actually talked to women about what does this actually mean? So talk to me a little bit about specifically around the connection between, really financial independence and personal joy. I think those were two sort of themes that we saw coming together for women.
Yeah, absolutely. And those things going hand in hand makes complete sense to me. We can't see a lot of those themes of pursuing passions or achieving goals without that agency and that financial independence that enables a woman to have the freedom to do those things. And I think something that we forget is that it wasn't even until 1974 that women could have their own bank account or credit card without a male cosigner. And when I say that, I'm talking about in the legal sense. Legally in 1974 is when it became allowed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's when the social stigma changed around a woman having financial independence. So that being such an integral part of a woman's perspective around agency and the freedom to create this life that she wants to create, this life that she's proud of, makes complete sense to me.
Yeah, and I think we were talking the other day even about how you're kind of scrolling through your feed on social media and you're seeing these women like living this sort of lovely life, and the aspiration is there. And so, I think brands really kind of need to strike the right balance of like showing that aspiration, but in a way that feels achievable and attainable, and isn't setting some sort of expectation that will never be met.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about that in the work that we do. We work a lot with our partners at Ipsos in the behavioral science department to get underneath some of these motivations. And we see that when advertising portrays the actual self versus an idealized self, it elicits a more positive response. So when we can create or brands can create those situations where we're bringing that to life in a real way and not kind of a rose-colored lens way, it's going to elicit a stronger reaction.
Yatisha, something else that we found from our research is that women really want to see themselves portrayed as physically strong, athletic, capable, and featuring a lot of different body shapes and sizes. Mm-hmm. We hear a lot about this, but we heard it directly from women. Talk to us about what you see for advertisers in this space.
So this is one of my favorite insights. Besides the correlations to the business growth, I think this one is so timely. With the rise of women's sports and the surge that we're seeing of interest from brands to participate in women's sports and trying to understand how to get it right. How do I use my name and image likeness and my celebrity endorsements correctly? How do I incorporate celebrity athletes in my advertisements, or even women showing themselves in roles where they're shown to be athletic? I thought that this was a very, very timely insight for us to dig into. And I also personally thought, when we've seen in the past that women want to be portrayed as strong because of the strong Black woman trope, I automatically had a vision of what that potentially meant. It could mean emotionally, mentally, but in actuality, what women were saying was physically. So again, I love surprises, and to have that wonderful nugget come out in the research was amazing to me. And to know that 63% of high gym scoring ads actually feature women as athletes in athletic roles just validates what brands need to do in terms of resonating with women and showing them in roles where they are physically strong, not just emotionally resilient. That really resonated with me. It's worth noting that women have multiple dimensions, multiple hats. And while we may be caretakers, we may be girlfriends or wives or etc., by adding that additional dimension of athleticism and physical strength, showing her defying stereotypes in that way and challenging gender norms in that way, not just all about pointed feet when you're jumping over the hurdle, but, sweaty and, strong and lifting, actively participating or leading in their sport, that it really does help to elevate the portrayals of women. It elevates the portrayal quality, and that creates role models for consumers, and it's something that they lean into.
Yeah, that's awesome. And women's sports is just on fire right now
Yes,
anyway, right?
yes.
So what a great way to connect to culture.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit. Let's shift gears and talk about some of those industry level findings. You mentioned we basically dug into, okay, what are the drivers of GEM overall, but then also within different verticals, how are we performing? Are we, lagging in certain areas or not?
When we were looking at the industry analysis, looking at GEM scores by category, 8 out of 9 of the industries showed the exact same pattern. The most common role for women were either mom or grandmother or wife and girlfriend. Only financial services actually broke the mold by featuring general professionals most often. And what's the most disappointing and most surprising is that across all categories, only 5% of ads show women in primary roles defying stereotypes. So women are half the population, but 95% of advertising still defaults to the same conventional, safe portrayals.
But these portrayals aren't always bad, right? Because if what matters most is actually that authentic portrayal, the real portrayal, the multidimensionality of women. We see actually that the healthcare industry is one that has the top scoring ads in the top third of GEM. And most of the women in that category are shown as mom or grandmother, this kind of maternal caregiving role. And that is fine. That's actually accepted by consumers because that is a realistic, authentic role that women play in real life. That is the role that many of them have. We make 80% of the purchasing decisions for a household. So as long as it's authentic, it matters. But that doesn't necessarily mean, to Shelley's point, that brands should just stop there and accept that kind of safe portrayal, because we also know that 80% of healthcare professionals are females. So why aren't we seeing that, dimension portrayed, that ratio of, females in this category portrayed in those roles, especially when we know from all of the research that See Her has done that 82% of GEM cases in the top third feature a woman as a STEM professional. So I think that presents a really tangible opportunity for brands to put women in this role that's less common in the category. A lot of my clients are in this category, so I'm going to pick on them a little bit. That when we looked at those averages of the Creative Effective Index scores, the breakthrough, that memory encoding, that ability to grab a consumer's attention tends to suffer, and they get lost in these category conventions. So the fact that we could grab onto this very authentic role that women play in the category and have something that's new and fresh and different in the healthcare industry and advertising could be a win-win for both Portrayal and for those brands.
And you said it really well. You said category conventions. I was going to say industry biases.
Yeah, that's
I think there's a lot of categories that, are historically male-dominated categories, like tech or auto and things like that, where, again, those default safe portrayals are very common and they are just continuing on. So it's great that you're challenging the healthcare category, despite them doing so great. I think everyone could use a little push.
Yeah.
Okay, you mentioned tech. Let's talk about tech and unpack it a little bit. We did this vertical analysis, tech, media, telecom. Unfortunately, the lowest gen performers of the industries that we looked at. So, Shelley, talk to us a little bit about this. What's going on here?
Yeah, so only 19% of ads in the top third of GEM for TMT. The sector is underperforming, and it's actually working against itself because there are a lot of opportunities there for tech. Like Rachel said, 82% of top-performing GEM cases feature women as STEM professionals. However, only 3% of TMT ads show women in these roles. And what we found as well was 55% of the portrayal was actually the default traditional role that I talked about earlier: mom, girlfriend, wife, grandmother, or friend.
There are other options here. I know it's crazy. It's crazy how much we saw that rising to the top across all of these different industries.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just shocking to me. And not something, we review advertising all day long, and I just had never really thought about that before. So that was definitely
And it's so interesting too to see the different ways that those alternate roles can play in different categories. We share an example for healthcare that features women in sports or in an athletic scenario that worked very positively for the brand. So these kind of different roles of athlete or professional don't have to be limited to categories that we might often associate them with.
All right, y'all. Last question, firing away. Imagine you're talking to the C-suite. You're talking to them about what they're going to need to change in 2026 to really move the needle forward and actually strive for more. Give us your take on what you would say to the C-suite.
Well, I would say that when you measure representation with the same rigor as you do performance, then you don't just shift culture. You are going to shift your bottom line. Your business outcomes are going to be positively impacted. And that's what we've seen with our members. And that's what I would say to the C-suite.
Love it. Rachel.
Yeah. So to those in charge of the research funds, I would say the non-negotiable step is to invest in that early stage research. And when I say early, I mean really early in that strategy, in that brief, in getting that right. Making sure that the insight is founded in an empathetic and relevant consumer tension for your brand, for your category, for the consumer that you're going to be speaking to. Because when we build on that, the authentic representation in execution will unfold.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the importance of that brain connection to that moment, making sure that you're showing up authentically. And, it's really the brand that is empowering women in this way, in a way that just makes sense for the brand and doesn't feel, disassociated from the insight that's being delivered.
Absolutely. We talk in the paper a little bit about how an authentic portrayal is great, but if no one remembers who it was for, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Shelley, what about you?
Yeah, for me, I would stress a little bit further along the creative process, the creative development process. And the non-negotiable step for a C-suite is to focus, during storyboarding, to focus on the roles that women are taking, the storylines that they're creating, and always test to make sure that you're speaking authentically and getting the consumer's point of view.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about testing and really doing the research and understanding. So one of the great things about our partnership here is that we are able to, at Ipsos, we're able to kind of bring together those effectiveness scores, the business results that you're talking about with GEM, and really understanding how we're doing on that portrayal and representation.
And many people may not know this, but we're actually not just measuring women, we're measuring women, men, boys, girls, any human in advertising, because we want to make sure that everyone is accurately represented, but it's also a good way to understand if there is some sort of bias in the representation and portrayal by looking at those data points in context. So it's been in existence for 10 years now, so there's a lot of data, a lot of insights that we can derive from it. And as you can see from this report, we're able to look at different industry verticals. We also evaluate based upon different other aspects that are interesting to brands like sports or health or different storylines. So that's why the driver's work was so important, because not only did we look at who was presented in the ad, we're looking at what are they doing? Who are they interacting with? What do they look like? Do they have some sort of ability? All those other things. So it's very, very interesting and rich what we're able to learn and ascertain from the database. And that's why it's so important to GEM test, because the more that people test, the more that we can learn and the more that we can help our marketers and our clients be better marketers.
Yeah. And I think you talked earlier about just the importance of keeping these measures at the forefront of conversations that brands are having around their advertising. And I think that's one of the most rewarding things that I've seen from the partnership is that when we're going in and we're sharing with our clients the results around their creative effectiveness and what they can be thinking about to improve their ad before it goes on air, we're talking about those effectiveness measures, but we also have GEM there as part of that KPI framework. And it's just naturally, really elevates it in the conversation and makes it something that the organization is focused on, is tracking over time, is really putting in the work behind that to make sure that they're understanding that and they're seeing those measures side by side. And I think that's just really where the impact of bringing these two data streams together comes in. Thank you so much, Yatisha, Rachel, Shelley, for all of the work that you put into this research and really bringing the consumer voice forward and sharing that with us today. Hopefully everyone watching has taken something new away that they didn't know before, some sort of surprise, yes, right? Yes. We all like to be surprised. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We encourage you to download the report and turn those insights into action.